Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone. It's very kind of informal presentation, so please don't have any high expectations. We're just here, I'm mostly familiar faces. First and foremost, obviously, Ramadan to everyone. Hope we have a good start to the month. And I appreciate the effort that people have made to come, especially when you're fasting. So we'll try to keep things fairly tight and brief and focused. And then if you have follow-up questions, you can bring them at the end, but also the lines of communication will be open, inshallah. People can raise questions as and when they need to. I'm going to start slightly differently today. We're going to have a presentation coming up in a minute. I want to just preempt a couple of things before we begin here. And that is because these are certain ideas that are often in people's minds that often color their view of a presentation before it's even begun. You have these kind of ideas that you come into a room with. And I think it would be worthwhile to just take a moment and try to leave some of those ideas outside. And one of them is about maybe a certain false notion that schools provide minimally a competent education. We kind of come from this point of view where we have the school as the yardstick, and then we're kind of looking at everything and saying, how is it comparing to a school? So I want people to try to leave that idea behind because it doesn't match up with the evidence. Okay, if you look at actual experts in education, educational theory, educational philosophy, they don't sit within the schooling system. That's the unfortunate thing. In other professions, like medicine, for example, the experts of that field sit within that field and they inform that field, if you get what I mean. Experts in education typically don't inform education. They have to write books in academia and hope that people pick up their ideas. Departments of education inform education. That's just the way education works in this country. So I want people to leave that idea behind because you may come in here thinking, as I said, that we have school as our yardstick and then we're trying to measure against that. That would only be a good strategy if schools were informed by state-of-the-art education, which they're not. And one of the best examples of that is, just to make it very clear for you guys, we've presented some of these ideas before where we've had people in the room who are 5, 6, 7 years into their work as teachers. And they've come in very skeptical. Like working in good schools, come in very skeptical. People, they unfairly criticize schools because they pick on the really bad ones and they don't look at representative samples of good schools. So we've had teachers like that come in, very good view of the schools that they are in, and saying, look, we're going to be able to dismiss this very early on, but have left at the end completely renegotiating their understanding of what it means to educate. So this is an important, it's not just in theory here. This is, what's happened in previous occasions here. So I want you guys to be aware of that. We're not here just theorizing. And that leads me to my second preemptive point, which is the fact that, so I live in Oxford and I have done so for about 10 years. And we've set up a schooling initiative there, an education initiative in Oxford, which is, again, very small scale, because we're not aiming here to mirror the industrial complex of modern schooling, right? That's the reason. But it's been going for 10 years since we moved to Oxford. My wife kind of began the kind of sea change there. And we have maybe about 50 odd kids now, 50 odd children from the age of 5 all the way up to the age of 14, 15. That in one way or another, not a singular provision, in one way or another have been educating outside of the industrial complex that is the modern school, right? So not just primary, but into secondary. 24 odd families, 50 odd children. Okay, so there's also some degree of a tried and testedness to what we're talking about here as well. So these are the main points that I wanted to bring up, because I know often, even as you're listening to a presentation, these are two things that are happening in the back of your mind. Number one, how does this compare to the safety net of school? There's no safety net of school, so I wanted to get rid of that. And number two, has anyone actually done this? I want to address that point. So now, with that stage set, we have our human clicker. Can we click forward?
Okay, I've been practicing all week for this. Bismillah.
So, in the interest of all projects, they need a name. So, we haven't settled on the idea of Seminarium, but that's not what we're here to talk about specifically. It's a umbrella project where we want to really take hold of the education conversation from many different dimensions. So Seminarium represents our long-term vision of not being able to only provide a provision of education for children, but to go beyond in terms of research. And this is what I referenced earlier about educational theory, educational philosophy, and also in terms of supporting the community. Workshops for parents, prospective parents, to understand what education really means, what the objectives of education are, and ways in which we as parents cannot abdicate our responsibility for educating our children. Okay. It's a bit of a legacy issue for us. We've inherited the schooling system, and in many ways, there is a comfort to being able to take your children and leave them at the school gate at a certain time and pick them up at a certain time. So this retraining that needs to happen will require workshops and seminars for us as parents to learn how to be involved in the education process. What we're here to talk about is our school specifically, or our education provision that we want to create. The first slide there is just to kind of emphasize what I've already mentioned, that we have something quite unique. I haven't seen it in many other places, where in one cohort or one social group, you have 5, 6, 7 teaching professionals, okay, working in various areas of education. It's not very common. But here in SLAP, for some reason, we have a very large pool of expertise, not just the names on the slide there, but beyond that, in terms of our wider networks and groups, we have Ofsted examiners, we have heads of departments, we have all sorts of connections within the world of education that we're drawing on in terms of expertise here. And this is important because a lot of the case studies, if we call them that, it's a bit of a glorified term, but a lot of the case studies that you may become familiar with for people that have withdrawn their children from school, it's not going to be the result of a conscious and a conscientious decision. It's going to largely be because a child was presenting maybe with problems at school, so they had to be withdrawn, or some parents making a purely ideological choice. I don't want my kids in school, and then kind of landing at home and not knowing what on earth to do with their kids. You're going to have all of these sorts of nightmare stories. And if not you, it's going to be your extended families. They're going to say to you, like, oh, we look at those kids over there and look, they're just running amok. So it's important for you to not conflate things which are not similar. Don't conflate any scenario where someone has withdrawn a child from school with what we're talking about here today. This is not the same thing. Because if you look at those situations, you just have isolated efforts of people that maybe have seen a problem that they're trying to address. What we're trying to do here is conscientious, focus, and to bring understanding, experience, and expertise to bear on this question of how we educate our children. Okay. So what we're going to talk through is very simple. There's only kind of 4 main areas. And I'm going to begin by speaking about the educational philosophy, some parts of the pedagogy, and then others will chime in and give a bit more of the concrete and granular detail that you guys might want. Okay, but we want to start from kind of an outward-in approach, really setting the stage. Why are we here? What is this all about? What's the point? Okay, that's what we need to really grab onto, and then we can start looking at the individual questions. So, we're sitting here as a Muslim community, and we have our own history and tradition when it comes to the function of knowledge, the purpose of knowledge. And so a very important part of what we're trying to do is to reclaim that heritage. In our tradition, in our religious worldview, knowledge is not merely an economic enterprise. Knowledge is not simply a question of how do I raise a child to be equipped with certain skills so that they are employable, marketable, and as a result of which they can have a stress-free, carefree existence. That's not the function of knowledge. It's not, it can be a peripheral, a subsidiary function of knowledge, but it is in no way the primary purpose of learning. And that is not true of the education system. We need to understand that there's a mismatch here. The education system, schooling, schools as we call them, were created in order, kind of not to go into a history lesson, but post-industrial revolution, in order to create a working population. When economics became a central measure of one country against another, this is the backdrop of an education. So all of that is reflected in what we teach and how we teach in schools. You go and what do you have to learn? You have to learn maths and sciences and humanities. The humanities are somewhat negotiable, especially when the pressure of economies emerge, as we see now. Schools, where do they cut back? They cut back on the humanities. But what's driving education? Science and maths, because these are the drivers of technology and industry. Okay, we are all part of that. We're all vehicles within that. And to live, we need to have some attention to that, while at the same time remembering that we are not sincere to our religious tradition if we subject knowledge to that lowest common denominator. That knowledge simply is making your children marketable, making them, preparing them for being able to find careers in the world, and so they can live and support their families. Okay. What knowledge is for us is a wide enterprise here. It includes the learning of the mind, but it also includes a certain fostering of an inward knowledge, knowing one's place in the world, knowing one's purpose in the world, which comes through building that spiritual intelligence that's demanded of us. It also means that we have to care for what we've been provided in terms of stewardship. And at the core of that is the very body, our limbs, our abilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us with. And to pay attention to the physical intelligence, which is part of that, to take care of oneself, to understand how your body is supposed to serve you in terms of being able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our social responsibilities. We are not here in the world without a care and concern for our community. So we want these sorts of outcomes. I'm not going to labor these points because that's not the purpose. We're not here to have a halaqah on all the various ways as Muslims we're supposed to be responsible beyond merely cognitive learning, intellectual learning. We know that. It's only to shine a light on the fact that we have abdicated our duties in that respect. We have to be honest. To what extent, rarely, for yourself. And often as parents, we go above and beyond for our children, but then to what degree for your children are you truly inculcating these virtues? So it's a very real question you have to ask yourself. If your children are simply going to school for 30 hours a week, and then you're sending them maybe to a weekend school for a couple of hours to learn some Quran, to learn some seerah or something like this. This is not a functioning society. This is not an Islamic ethos. This is a complete abdication of one's responsibility in terms of religious duties. Okay. I give those examples because that's the norm. That's what we see. We see essentially this commitment to modern schooling, and then around that, what small things you can, maybe 20 minutes or half an hour on weekdays where children may go and learn some Quran. And then if you're lucky, because I work in some of these schools, I have worked in some of these schools, we have maybe 150 children here, 150 children in another, and we have altogether maybe 4 or 5 main weekend schools. So you've only got about 500 kids out of the population of what in Islam. So I meet, and I do mentoring work, and I see normally in my class of 10, maybe 2 or 3 of them have grown up going to weekend schools, and the other 6, 7 haven't even had that. So I want us to be really aware, because none of this will make sense until we are honest with ourselves and we accept responsibility for where we are. And where we are is we have abdicated our responsibilities in terms of what Islam and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands of us in the raising of our children. We need to understand that. Then we can become serious about solutions and remedies. Okay, what do we need to do? Where do we need to go? And this is our first effort in providing something to help remedy that. But it's not for the community at large at this stage. That's why it's small. We haven't kind of advertised. You would not have seen any sort of advertising anyway, because it was a curated presentation. Meaning, we said we have only around 8 odd spaces available. It's something small that we're trying to do here. And so it's going to be a case of speaking to people that we hope share a similar vision and working out that if we need to introduce more people into the conversation, then we'll introduce more people into the conversation. There's no point going out to everyone. Number one, you can't filter down to people that are serious and committed. And number two, if you do end up with much more demand than what you're able to provide, that would be an unfortunate situation, right? So this is our method to speak to people on a small scale level. Moving on, so these are the areas that we want to focus on. And in doing so, to reintroduce something that we've all lost touch with. You as parents are the primary caregivers and those who are primarily responsible for your children in every respect, in everything in their lives. That ultimate responsibility falls onto you. And it's not just a responsibility with your children. I'm sure each of you, you're here because you have children. You don't only look at your children as a responsibility, you also look to them in the hope that you are nurturing a relationship that's going to be lifelong. Okay, but ask yourself, is that the reality on the ground? Is that our social reality? That you can just look across families and what you find is a strong, healthy bond of a relationship between parents and children. I would presume to say that that's not the case. That you see a mixed bag. You see some cases where that's fine, and many cases where we have failings in that aspect. And it doesn't need to be extreme failings. It can be simple things that there's all sorts of people that you will know that have great respect for their parents, but have no relationship with their parents really. No deep relationship where you're sitting and talking about the purpose of life or anything meaningful. You'll serve your parents, but you're not able to talk with your parents. This is very common in our community, right? And so a lot of that has happened, I would argue, because we're not focusing on this question of building bonded relationships with our children. And then if you begin to ask that question, immediately it becomes quite a practical question. How do you expect to do so if 8 o'clock in the morning you're taking your child and you're dropping them off at school? And then nowadays with bolt-ons and other, because parents are working and whatnot, you have these extensions to the school day. The children are getting home maybe around 5, and it's a rush to feed them and make them do their homework and put them to bed. That's essentially most of your week. And then just because of habit and culture, by osmosis, we absorb the culture that we live in. We think that that's going to be remedied by having maybe a weekend day, whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday, which is the family day. And then some holidays in the spring and summer, there we go. There's nothing, you're just following the tide there. It's just essentially what the modern world does. it sees in the modern world, within the confines of the modern world, that philosophy sees itself as the only option available, really, because for the driving of the economy of your country, everyone has to work, mother and father. Children have to go to school, and all you have left then is that Saturday or that Sunday and those holidays that you set aside in the summer. Okay? That is not going to foster what we want. It's not going to build those relationships. My own children, just to make it again, somewhat clearer and plainer, don't have that experience because they don't have to go to school. We have them at home and they're involved in different clubs and stuff. And I see firsthand the impact and the effect of seeing my kids regularly every day, being able to see them regularly every day, being able to have conversations with them regularly every day, being able to be seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Okay. And so we want to provide a way for people to, number one, understand the importance of that parental responsibility and that lifelong bond. But then secondly, to understand that it requires a whole different vision in terms of your engagement with your children. Okay. So, slowly narrowing in, we understand to some degree why. What's the point of tackling this question around our children's education? To educate them as whole human beings. And we also understand now that we're trying to rekindle and reignite this familial bond, this way of having families where the parents are the center of a child's life, and that bond is built in such a way that it sustains itself in a lifelong manner. But then we come down to the individual components of education that we're interested in. And to set the stage here, we're only talking presently at a very young age. So we're talking about where children would be beginning their journey of community education, coming together as a cohort to learn. So roughly the age of 5, 6, that sort of age. So this is not to say that the ideas about educating all the way through are not there. That's a separate conversation. If people are interested, maybe because you have older children as well, and you want to hear more about educating teenagers or lifelong education, these are things that we can talk about. But today, we're really focusing in on education in the very early years. And these are the areas that we believe that there needs to be a focus on. Some of these areas, partly because of the demands of modern living. We have to respect those demands, even if we vehemently disagree with the options that are currently available to address them. That shows maturity. We're not here saying, yeah, you kids don't need to learn science or maths. It's all modern conspiracy. That's not the point. The point is we can see clear failures in the way that our children are being educated while respecting the things that they need to be educated in. We just need to find alternatives. We need to find better ways of doing things. So part of that respect comes through by appreciating that mathematical reasoning, which is a new term perhaps for you guys. You guys are maybe familiar with very straightforward language, maths, numeracy, literacy, things like this. Very purposefully here, we're trying to break away from that language. It will be reintroduced a bit later because the mind takes time to acclimatize itself. So we will have some of those markers coming up later. But initially, we don't want to sink into old language. We want you guys to understand this is a complete excision, a complete removal and stepping outside of the schooling complex, where we just sink into language like, but how is the numeracy going to be addressed? How is the literacy going to be addressed? No, this is not really what's happening in education. What we're trying to do is build certain features of the human being. One of those features, one of those abilities that we have as a God-given ability is mathematical reasoning. This ability to rationalize, this ability to conduct a very sophisticated cognitive process of reasoning, making logical arguments, understanding how inferences are made. And then we apply it in domains. We apply it in what we call today mathematics. We apply it in what we call information technology. We apply it in the sciences. But actually, there's a core cognitive skill that's just being applied across those domains. That's really what's happening at the nuts and bolts levels of what's happening. A physicist is not different from a mathematician, from a biologist. These are people that are applying a core mathematical ability in their distinct domains. Okay. So we're going back here, we're stripping back under the surface and really getting down to the heart of educational philosophy. How do we then culture and nurture this ability to reason well in the domain of mathematical reasoning? So that's an area that we want to give strong attention to. Language mastery. Again, it's not about literacy. It's not about how well you can read. It's not about presentation skills. It's not about how well you can digest information, things like that. These are all the derivative effects. Again, we've just compartmentalized them and we've learned those languages because that's how it's presented to us in society. But at its core is an ability to master language. This is what we have, again, in our underlying human abilities. We have an ability to understand that communication is something which is a distinct feature of our species, the way that we communicate. And then it takes on many forms. It takes on the forms of different languages, for example, or it takes on the forms of different medium, oral versus written, things like that. But these are all derivative secondary questions. So again, we're going back to principles here and focusing on these primary principles. Language is what's important. First and foremost, the essential features of language are communicatory language. How well you can speak and articulate the ideas that you're trying to communicate from yourself to someone else. And when those underlying abilities are made strong, for you to then migrate those abilities onto the written page, into a presentation, onto a PowerPoint, where this is all just migrating a core skill into various domains again. So what we're trying to help you guys understand something about good philosophy of education here. It's not about looking at individual subjects or stuff like this. It all comes out of a vision first. And that vision is understanding the human being, what abilities we have and how we educate and nurture those abilities. So we've spoken about mathematical reasoning, we've spoken about language mastery, but also we have social traditions of learning. We call it Islam, but Islam is an inherited social tradition of learning. It's about being enculturated into a community. Islam is not about you segregating yourself off and doing one or two things here. It's about being part of a knowledge community which has been inherited, knowledge which has been passed down. And so even though it says Arabic in Quran, our goal is not here what you might think. Often again, as parents, we go and we just segment and we say, look, I want my child to learn some surahs. I want my child to go and learn some Arabic vocabulary. I want them to go. And there's no real cohesion. Why? What are you doing all of this for? What function is it serving? What purpose are you working towards? And then somebody will stop and think for a minute. Actually, the whole point is to raise children who are strong in their Islam. They have strong faith. Let's drill down a bit more on that as well. Sorry, what do you mean strong faith? Because again, you just go to concrete examples like maybe someone that's memorized a lot of Quran, that's strong faith. No, not necessarily. People can memorize a lot of Quran and not have a deep Islam. Maybe someone who's praying all their 5 daily prayers. Yes, true, but some people that can become a habit and it's not a deep faith issue for them. Okay, now let's get back down to the real basics. Or you mean someone that has a genuine connection with their Lord? This deep metaphysics of Islam that we're really interested in, someone that lives and breathes a relationship with that primary connection between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, this is Islam now. This is what you're talking about. Okay, now this is very different. How do you educate for that? It's no longer going to be a simple accounting exercise of have they learned enough surahs or Have I got them started on enough prayers? Yes, those are all going to be important ingredients within that. But then you're going to start to, be able to really, your eyes open and say, we've got it completely wrong. Again, we're just dropping our kids off at Islamic schools thinking, tick box exercise, they've learned 2 more surahs, they've learned 1 dua, they've done, no, absolutely not. Because this is not going to build that deep metaphysics of Islam that we're trying to inculcate. That often we see failings with respect to ourselves. And, everything's a struggle. We don't have that deep relationship that it's growing out of. It's not grounded in the sort of religious upbringing that would have nurtured and fostered that sort of relationship with Allah, with the Messenger of Allah, with the foundations of Islam. So we want to bring that into the lives of our children, not by saying, oh, we're going to have a Quran teacher and we're going to go through some surahs. Yes, we will do that. You'll see maybe some aspects of that spoken about today. But really at the heart of this is to make Islam something that's a living, breathing reality for children. And that takes a lot more thought than simply ticking off small things that you teach your children, which are all very important. But it's a lot more, it's a lot deeper than that. Okay, so we want to focus in on that question. Lastly, world learning. Again, we talk in terms of science and history and geography, distinct subjects. They're not. We're human beings. We've been given an intellectual reasoning ability. We've been given a communicatory ability. And we use them to explore our world. We use them to explore our world. And when we explore them as finite creatures, obviously we have to compartmentalize, and we treat certain explorations as geographical explorations, and we treat certain explorations as astronomical explorations, and we might treat other explorations as historical explorations. But it's just us exploring our world. That's what we're doing. And that's the ability that we need to develop, that our children can then turn their hand to, whether it's geography, whether it's history, whether it's economics, whether it's other disciplines. So again, just trying to retrain ourselves to understand education in a different way here, and not to jump straight into our segmented, compartmentalized view of discrete subjects that you're trying to get your children to learn and understand. Our workshops hopefully will be able to take these themes further, and we can really go into them in some detail. But the main objective here for this slide is what? To reposition the whole understanding that you have of what you're trying to do when you're educating someone. Because I, as someone who works and lives and breathes this, may take this for granted. But then I'm always brought back down to earth when I meet parents and talk to people, and the language is all maths, English, science, GCSE, and you realize actually people have no other cognitive scaffolding for their understanding. This is their whole understanding. They understand education completely within those realms. So it's an exercise in just introducing you all to a very different way and a much more natural, intuitive, correct way of understanding what you're trying to do. And it doesn't just apply to your kids. Use this for yourself and think about how you develop these things, your basic reasoning abilities, your linguistic competency, understanding Islam as a lived, breathing tradition, how well you are part of learning Islam in that sort of a way. Okay, and then your exploration of the world. Why is it that everyone, I'm an economics guy, I only have interest in law, I only have interest in my field? Where did that come from? That is such a beaten down attitude. You've literally been schooled into a single discipline that you have an interest and passion about now. That's schooled into you now. And if you start to undo that in yourself, you will begin to see much more clearly, and you'll see the impact that you need to bring to bear in your children's education as well. Okay. So my portion ends there in terms of setting the stage. But we all want at this point some granularity and some exposure to the nuts and bolts of things. And so we'll pass over to those who are much more adept at speaking about the nuts and bolts of things. Mohsin, I think you want to jump in.
So just to explain the curriculum in more detail. So you know exactly that if you send your child to this provision, exactly what their day-to-day running would look like. So we'll go through the timetable specifically in more detail. But one of the first things that I wanted to mention that when children go into school in year one, so we're talking 5, 6-year-olds, unfortunately, straight away it's a kind of table, chairs, board kind of approach, which is really not correctly picked for children that age. So we're going to offer a continuous provision, which I've got a definition on the board. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing. Describes all the provisions are available continuously. So the child always has access to it. So it's kind of like learning through play, but it's very much so active learning and gets them to really be active participants within their learning. It's important to mention here the continuous provision, because when I speak about maths and when we speak about literacy and phonics, etc., we are going to try to link it with our continuous provision. So the maths, they should be having real life maths experience. So if we take an example of having a mud kitchen, maybe they could be weighing things, measuring things, comparing, counting, adding, subtracting, but doing that in a lot more meaningful way, either indoors or outdoors, through this sort of provision, is a lot more beneficial and a lot more impactful on the child than merely just a worksheet, which is something that children and parents unfortunately fall into when it comes to this kind of homeschooling realm type of environment that they think is just worksheet driven. So we want to make it clear that that's not the approach that we are trying to cater for with our schooling, inshallah, or our community schooling. Again, with numeracy, so I've got some examples here that instead of just having a whiteboard and having this is what the learning is, we would take the learning objective, which is taken from the national curriculum, and try to, as much as we can, impart that knowledge to the children through the outdoor and the playing and the active learning and active participation. There is, of course, some form of instructional learning where the children do just need to listen to a teacher do the delivery, and that's fine. You can't really move away from that. But it's not 100% just children, whiteboard, pen, board. There's a mix of active participation so that the maths is purposeful. And that's really the aim, especially at that young age of 5 and 6. And also, so this is the actual timetable of what the maths that's going to be taking place. The reason I want to go through this is because when we go through the timetable, you'll notice that there's a few hours in our provision. And parents might get the misconception that because there's fewer hours, there's fewer learning taking place. Maths will still be taught every single day. And the key concepts of place value, basically number sense, all of it will be taught. So you're probably thinking, how are we teaching the whole breadth of the curriculum in a shortened day? But we'll go through that a little bit later. I just wanted to reassure you and show you that we are using a math scheme. The math scheme is really strong, and Saad, being our secondary school specialist, we've gone through it together, and so we know what's completely necessary for a child to be learning at that age, and it all will be taught. And just something that I'll allow you to have a look at for a few seconds to digest before moving on. And it's again important to remember, teaching place value in a class of 30 children is a lot different than teaching place value in a class of 10 children. If you imagine how much support a child will be receiving, and if there's any gaps or any difficulties or any challenges, it's a lot easier to address these than had that child been in a class of 30. If anyone's in the school, then you know intervention program starts taking place. But it's really easy for gaps to increase over time because the child simply missed the learning and the teacher was not able to go back and address the learning. So hopefully that gives you an outline of the maths. And this is just a very good typical unit. So as you say, counting within 20, understanding 10, understanding counting one more, one less. We're hoping to meet these objectives through the continuous provision, not just a worksheet. If Ustad Ali has a whole bunch of physical objects in the learning environment, and we're counting one and it's counting away, that's a lot better and a lot more impactful than just going through a whiteboard type of system. So we want the learning to be purposeful, but we also want parents to be aware that we're not missing steps in your child's learning because of the reduced timetable. So I think that maybe that's just the main message that I wanted to get across. And if there is ever, we want to consolidate the learning, then there is also, through the scheme, worksheets which are readily available. But this will probably be more given to parents to support. If we think, oh, Abdullah needs more support in this, then we would give the provision, say these are the worksheets that you can do to help him that work alongside the objective. So that's maths in a nutshell. Literacy, similarly, we will be following a scheme which has pretty much entirely been mapped up for us for the academic year. Not only is it mapped out for us, it will also be touching on the aspects of grammar, of spelling, of phonics, of handwriting. Again, just to emphasize that things aren't being neglected or avoided, and it's actually really well thought out, really well planned. We have everything that we need in order to develop a very high quality curriculum. This curriculum is something that is used in Reading at the moment. So I work in Reading, and I'm a writing lead at my school, and we had to look at various curriculums to try to increase the quality of writing, cohesion, subject-verb agreement, grammar, spelling. And the 3 best schools in Reading are currently using this scheme. So we've bought into the scheme, and then I just took it. And I just took it for our community school. But again, they have strong lesson plannings. As you can see, the lesson plannings are linked with the objective, which is linked to the national curriculum. There's a strong plan in place. It's very clearly for the teacher what resources are needed, and everything is lined out for us. So again, if you were to compare this to another homeschooling model, maybe this is something that is outsourced, something that you have to pay extra for. Maybe the parents try to do them themselves through Twinkle worksheets or just worksheet heavy. But this is something that we've thought of, embedded into our provision.
It's my turn now. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm going to stand up. I'd never sit. There's a couple of things that have been pointed out as we've gone along. I don't want to go over anything too much, but I just want to emphasize, sometimes it can look like it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing. You know, we have an example in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions some people criticize that when the animal is slaughtered and it's made halal and the name of Allah is recited over it, they said, well, it's just dead meat, just like that is dead meat. They're both the same thing. But we understand that there is something slightly different. It's not the same thing. If we're looking at things just in a material way, then yeah, it's the same thing. But things aren't just material. It's a bit more than that. I want to talk a little bit about this and give you some understanding to what and how. We want to learn about the world in the world. You know, what we are trying to produce, we're not trying to produce electricians. We're not primarily trying to produce astrophysicists. What we're trying to produce is insan. And that's a responsibility given to us by Allah. We need to produce a human being as envisioned by God himself, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to give some attention to this. And in modern schooling, what easily happens is that the human being is abstracted from nature, is abstracted from his own nature, is abstracted from God, is abstracted from his own self. Humans, we're built and designed to think, we're built and designed to move, and schooling is increasingly sedentary. Okay, I mean, even here, our presentation is like People are hardly moving even to breathe. It's a very sedentary. Imagine your kids doing this for 8 hours. And then a bell goes and they're allowed to go and run around like crazy. Then they have to come back in. And if they don't calm down super quick, and if they're not in order, there's going to be penalties. And this is not how insan is. We want to learn about the world in the world. We need to get back in contact with our fitrah. We need to get back in contact with the fitrah upon which Allah has created each and everything. And this is important. We are part and parcel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. And through contact with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we come in contact with Allah himself, and this is some of the wisdom that we learn from the Quran. By his mercy, we come to know the most merciful. This is essentially what we want to do with our children. If we got our kids through all of schooling, at the end of it, they didn't believe in God, they didn't believe in themselves, they didn't know which way is up, they don't know which way is down. And this is the current reality of conventional schooling. They don't even know if they're men or women by the end of it. That's just a symptom. That's just a small symptom, a little, a tidbit. Worse than that is that they don't know what their relationship with Allah is. They don't know what their relationship with the natural world around us is. This is where the value of outdoor experiential learning and development comes into hand. It'll be very beneficial for us to understand this a little bit. We want to learn about the world. We're going to be learning about geography and history and science and art and all of these things. But there are other things that we need to think about. Our environment and us as human beings, how we relate to it. Our heritage, our tradition as Muslims, having inherited guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the prophets. Okay, we have a heritage going back thousands of years. Our heritage goes back even before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're connected to something which is deeply rooted in the essence of being a human. We need to learn how to use our bodies, our arms, our legs, our ears, our eyes. Myopia increases when you're sitting indoors and you're sedentary. When you're sitting in front of a desk and the furthest you need to look is 50 centimeters away, your eyesight goes wrong, And we have words in our own language which are quite natural. Kamzor, harab. These words don't exist in English. Like there isn't something to explain if you're sitting in front of a desk and you're doing work and your eyesight's going to go bad. It doesn't quite, it doesn't have the same ring to it, and it's not used. It's simply not used. This sedentary schooling method that we have, that is, everybody's eager and chasing after, it results in things that we don't want for our children. It results in failures in terms of their development. It results in failures in terms of their education. It results in them becoming weak in certain elements of their physical being, their cognitive being, their spiritual being, all of those things we signposted earlier on. The way humans learn is we are quite practical. We engage with things. We are hands-on. You are not going to be able to write down the instructions of how to make roti in a book and somebody's going to be able to go and replicate that. That's just not how we learn. You're not going to be able to write down in a book, this is how you recite Quran, and give it to somebody and they're going to recite Quran. This is not how it works. Conventional schooling acknowledges this to some extent, and then it does an extremely poor job of delivering that. They understand that in order to learn to read, you have to have some audition, you have to hear, you have to practice pronouncing. Like, there's so many things involved. We read to our kids when we're putting them to bed maybe, or in the day. But all of these things, they get compromised through conventional schooling. Firstly, your child is abstracted from you. You're abstracted, you're completely ripped apart from one another, and you don't have the privilege, the leisure, the time, the convenience to do that. It's completely subcontracted to somebody else to do, under the assumption that they are doing it, and that they're doing it at least 70% efficiency or 30% efficiency. We need to think about some of these things, really. Another thing that's important is that along with incorporating all these different facets of learning into our children's education, we need to understand that all of this stuff can be done in a very secularized way. And that's what is being doing. That's what is being done. That's what's been happening for the past God knows how many decades. We come from a tradition where all of this was done, and it was taken to its heights by doing it in a desecularized way, in a way in which God was at the forefront of everything. And that, I mean, any of these things, we can trace their we can trace them back to the Muslim tradition somewhere. And it was done with a sure focus on God and wanting to know God better. While now it's done in the complete opposite way around. You know, it's not an issue of looking at, is the glass half full or half empty? The glass is upside down. We need to be thinking about turning it the right way around and doing it properly for our children, inshallah. So while we approach these subjects through a Quranic worldview, which will be embedded throughout our curriculum, we will be facilitating participation. We will be building children's confidence in doing these different activities, learning about these different things, and nurturing a sense of stewardship towards them, towards themselves, towards the world around them, towards the people that they engage with. So just to give an idea of what our syllabus might look like through 1 year, we have it broken up here into blocks of 6 weeks, just like conventional schooling is. It will be, perhaps the boundaries of this will be a bit more diffuse than it looks like on paper. We like seeing things on paper. We like seeing, you know, a business plan or a project plan of some sort. So that's what this is, but it'll be done in a lot more diffuse way, inshallah. So just learning about our environment, learning about materials and resources we use, thinking about risk which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for us, our relationship with that, the kinds of anxieties we should or shouldn't have with that. Learning about history in the past and how people lived, how people live today. These are all things which have, all of these topics, they have some remnants of them in the national curriculum, but it's done in the worst way possible. It is not done in what could be described as an efficient way. It's not done in a meaningful way. We're still having serious problems. We want to do this in a qualitative way, which builds up our children and takes them towards being insanul kamil, that complete, whole, well-made human being. That person who is subservient to God and knows him, knows their relationship with him. Each one of these things we could do, for example, if we delivered a program where we were maybe doing our own gardening, potting our own plants. We can talk about all of these things. Let's say, for example, we create a vegetable garden. The first element here, my learning environment, we could map these things out, understand where things are, create aerial views, navigate around, do some orientation. So we will achieve those same goals and outcomes, learning outcomes for that first term in autumn. We could do the same even here, designing a solution. Let's say, for example, we need to build or make something as we're building in our vegetable garden. Perhaps we want to, we note a problem, we want to create a solution to it, get the children involved, let them use their minds, their imagination, let them collaborate, let them talk, let them actually get tinkering and tailoring, doing all of the arts and crafts stuff, making something and then using it. You know, the dignity a person has, even children, in saying, you know, that's something that I made and it's being used every day, and just seeing it. Every day, our kids come home with something or another and we stick it up on the fridge with a magnet. And we have a sense of pride in it, they have a sense of pride in it. This is a thing, like human beings, we like seeing our handiwork, you know, it's an uplifting thing. So we want to try and build these things in, inshallah. We have quite a bit of structure underneath the skin of all of this. It might not be too clear for you guys to see, but this is just an example of what term one might look like. As we're learning about our environment, the spaces around us and how we engage with them, different skills we'll be learning along the way, learning about different types of tools and resources we have at our disposal, learning different social skills, you know, soft skills in terms of communication, and then building that across the curriculum as well. So bringing into that the mathematical reasoning, bringing into that the language mastery, bringing into that the tarbiyah elements as well, you know, and connecting things back to our faith tradition. So this is a simple lesson plan for the very first lesson in that 6-week period. Just knowing what's around us and how it is and where we are, and it's important for us to understand that we're going to have structured lessons. This isn't just a play school and kids are coming in and it's a free-for-all. Sometimes we see tables and chairs as giving some notion of structure and discipline. And while those things are good, too much of it is a bad thing. Okay, and children, they really need to move, they really need to be involved, they really need to experience, you know, the sunshine and the space and everything around them. They need to touch and feel and see things, and we need to make sure we don't take that away from our kids. That's really important. That's an important responsibility we have. So with world learning, we'll be learning about plants and science and, wildlife and the processes going on around us, but it really is about learning about the world while being in the world, not abstracting ourselves from it, inshallah. Further to this, as we mentioned earlier on, we're going to be learning a little bit about Quran and Arabic as well as we go along. Again, we have a structured program for this. We're going to be using the CEFR model. And we're going to be exceeding the amount of time that is actually delivered during this program. Through our delivery, we'll be exceeding this by about 10+ hours, hopefully. Okay. And this will hopefully help our children move towards being bilingual. Number one, this is one really important thing, something which is, I think for most of us, we lament that our children have almost lost this. They're no longer fully bilingual. Even us, maybe we were bilingual and we hadn't reached mastery in both languages. This is something that we need to address. We need to turn the tide on this. And of all the options, whether we're going to learn Tamil or Sindhi or Punjabi or Urdu, I think we are quite agreed that Arabic is the obvious choice, inshallah. And it is something that throughout the Islamic tradition, for over a millennia, wherever we went, Arabic was maintained. It was sustained, even in India, even in China, even in Morocco. Wherever you go, Arabic was introduced because this is the medium through which you're going to engage with the Book of Allah. This is the medium through which you're going to engage with the message of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's very important that we give attention to this. Our Islamic learning is going to be embedded throughout too. Bismillah. It's very important that we think about how we are going to develop akhlaq, how we are going to develop shakhsiyah for our children. Okay, there's lots of things out there. Ourselves, I mean, collectively, we've been involved in community education for a very long time. We've seen all of the different types of tick box exercises and the pastiche deliveries. They don't quite do it. We want to do this properly, inshallah. We have a good idea of what is required, how it's required, and we want to invite you guys to participate as well. It can be as simple as just teaching children the dhikr for this and the dhikr for that, but really we want them to be fully engaged in a meaningful way and know their Lord. This is really important. Nowadays, we see loads of problems. My daughter, just yesterday, she was mentioning to me at school, they've got a survey, and the survey posted some simple question for a young person. They think, oh yeah, excellent. Like, what are the most important concerns for young people nowadays? And the options are, do you think bullying is one of the most important concerns for young people nowadays? And it's a bit of a redundant question. The problem is, if people don't have, you can't solve bullying by doing a survey amongst a bunch of teenagers or children, and they've said, yep, this is a problem for us, and then you're going to say, yep, we're going to turn our attention to this, we're going to eradicate bullying. Like, how are you going to eradicate bullying? You have to teach akhlaq, you have to teach ethics, you have to teach morality. And in a secularized schooling system, which takes an oath it's not going to do any of this, how are you going to address bullying? What are you going to do? How are you going to address safety? How are you going to address people being liabilities to other people, taking advantage of them and just having these very low base, utilitarian ethics that because I can, I will, it will help me, or whatever it is, whatever the reasoning and the logic is. But you can't do that by removing somebody from the Islamic tarbiyah. You're not going to be able to remedy these things. We want to create a better society, and that means the individual elements that comprise a society, our children. We need to create better children, better humans. This is what we need to do. So we're going to have to give this time, inshallah. Yeah, Bismillah, back to you.
Thank you very much. There's so many things I could pick up on in what both Hossein and Arifa have mentioned, but we'll leave that for another conversation. This is a typical school week. Okay, this is what we're arguing against. This is what we're presenting a case against. Your typical school week, which means that your children are up very early and rushing to have a bit of breakfast before they're out of the door, heading straight off to school. The school day finishes minimally at 3:30, sometimes a bit later. But often now you have this culture of after school programs and classes, Or really solving an economic problem. Parents are both working potentially, and children need to be looked after essentially. And so within this, we've already addressed it. There isn't much scope here for building strong family relationships. So we're trying to move away from this, as we'll see now, that what we're offering here is a very trimmed down philosophy here, where children are coming together to learn for approximately 3 hours a day. Okay. And just mentioning, and this is stuff that we've done in Oxford, it's not just theoretical. 3 hours a day, covering the full spectrum of what Mohsin and Ali Ahmed have mentioned. And this is where you're placing that trust and reliance in the expertise in the room, as you've seen here. These are not people sitting here with an ideological bent. Don't put your kids in school. And then when you ask them, so what are our kids going to learn? And then you kind of like, no idea. You've seen the schemes of work. You've seen the learning objectives. You've seen the lesson planning. We've spoken about the network of skills and expertise. And just to go into that one question about the network of skills and expertise available to us as educators would take 2 hours. Just to showcase the myriad, like in Oxford, we had Oxford University lecturers in neuroscience coming talking to our Key Stage 2 children about the work that they do. We have zoologists, historians. These are people that we know in our wider communities. The expertise of people that we can draw on to really make learning come alive. So we have this reduced system here where the core skills, the core experiences in that mixture of continuous provision, indoor and outdoor experiential learning, all tied in, not with a bolt-on of Arabic or a bolt-on of Quran, but tied into a worldview learning that is grounded in Islamic metaphysics. This is what we're trying to build here, okay, for our own children. This is not a pitch for a business or something that we're going to scale up and 3 years down the line we have 100 children in the same problem as modern schools. This is just a small provision here for those people that have enough foresight to actually understand something that's valuable and to participate in it. And I say it that way because that is really the difficult ingredient. If you look at every human enterprise that succeeds, you have the entry phase in which a very, very, very small percentage of people participate. Because naturally, it's the point of greatest uncertainty. Everybody wants to do what? Everybody wants to wait 5 years until something is really good and then struggle to get in because there's waiting lists and you're like, well, we can't get in. And then it's tough. Okay, tough for you. You don't have the foresight of vision to get involved in something, okay, at the right stage. So we're trying to innovate here, and this is our timetable. This is what we're going to be doing with the children. But then what does this mean? Taking it all the way back to that parental bonding that we spoke about. It comes down to your timetable. This is what it's all about now. If you want to, and if you want to sustain that abdication of responsibility, and you like the fact actually that I don't have to see my kids for 7 hours a day, then that's great. But it's going to come at a cost. And the opposite of that is also true. We're not building a provision here for people that want to have that crutch in life where they don't have to worry about their kids for 6 or 7 hours a day. We want to create a provision where you're saying, I want to reclaim time with my children. I want to have relationship that I can build with my children. And a deep one at that. Something that's built around shared experiences. How much better would it be than having to continually ask your children, but what did you do today at school? Because you have no exposure to it and no involvement in it, then rather not even have to ever address that question again, because you are involved in so many aspects of your children's learning that you don't need to be asking them what to do. That would be such an improvement, right? And that's what we're looking at here, that for the latter half of every day, it's your choice. Supported, by the way, through those workshops and seminars. Because you're sitting there thinking, well, What can I do? I can barely read myself. And you want me to help my children read? No, but that's the whole thing. You cannot raise and educate and nurture your children in exclusion to nurturing yourself. We've tried this. It doesn't work. We've tried it for a whole generation now in this country, at least, where parents have kind of said, well, I haven't done X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to make sure my children do. And it doesn't work. You will get certain external outcomes that you might want. You've got this child now who's memorized the whole of Quran, but with 4 years later, doesn't remember a word of it. You'll get the external outcome, and you'll get, you've got the child that's whipped into shape, praying 5 times a day, but doesn't pray when they're now married in their own house and no one's worried about looking over their shoulder, but they'll still pray when they come to visit you. You can get the externalities very easily, but you're not going to get the real outcomes until we reclaim that relationship. So this is what your timetable provides you. The learning that you're able to share in with these children, supported through the training, to borrow the modern vernacular, that we aim to provide through actual involvement. And this is also now teaching you something about expectations. You have to be interested in improving yourself as a human being. And that means you're going to have to be willing to come and ask these questions. So how does reading happen? How do we build a culture of literacy? How do we get interested in the written word, and how the written word transports us to different cultures and different points of human history and becomes a great vehicle for self-knowledge? I need to get involved in retraining my own understanding about reading, building my own culture of literacy, being supported to understand how to do that well. And then I'm going to be really supported to help my children in those same outcomes. So rather than looking at it as, how much work are we going to have to do? Think of this as that we have failed ourselves in so many ways. What are we going to carry on that way until, I remember the phrase now, but death comes knocking at the door? Is that literally how we're going to go? Just with abstract goals and aspirations that we never work towards. We're also there thinking, I wish I had a culture of reading. I wish I had a culture of attending the masjid for regular prayers. I wish I had a culture of the Quran being central every day and reading it. But we have to be honest, in so many of our households, one or more of these things are failing. We are not attending the masajid on a daily basis. We're not reading the Quran every single day. We're not taking up that goal of learning the language of the Quran. Things like this are not happening. Take this as an opportunity, not only that you are finally standing up and fulfilling those responsibilities for your children, but you're learning that it's only really going to happen if you fulfill those responsibilities to some part for yourselves. And don't see that as a burden. See that as you should be coming and saying, thank you at the end of it. You're welcome that we're giving you this opportunity, because this is what happens. Decades of people's lives pass and they'll never actually take on any of those objectives. When they were young, they had grand plans for, I'm going to learn Arabic, I'm going to travel the Muslim world, I'm going to read all these books and become knowledgeable about it. So nothing happens. And we're giving you an opportunity to truly realize those potentials within yourselves, but with your children at the same time. Amazing opportunity, because your children often push you to stick with your goals. Often you'll try to, something is easy to leave off, but it's just you that you're accountable to. But when you're also in this journey with your children, you'll see that it's much more long lasting. And also then to build a registry of knowledge about what's available in your community. Like I spoke to in a mentoring context to students, and I said, did you know that in Slough you can go and learn fencing? Did you know you could do this? And most of them, apart from one student, I think, shook their head and said, I don't know, people don't know what fencing is, but you can go and learn a skill that is very unique experience as a human being. And this is something amazing as part of our fitrah, again, that Ali Ahmed mentioned, our desire to seek out novelty and new experiences and to gain meaning from them. Not only that, the pragmatic value in that. I often say, in mentoring context, when you are going for those lucrative career positions, when you are going for, whether it's in a job or in a social enterprise or in a charity context, you're going and you're applying for some position, and you're there and you have to mingle and you have to talk to people. And often people will ask you, so what are your interests? What do you do? And the amount of times in this community, unfortunately, compared to others, the answer is a blank stare. What are your interests? And I'm not even talking about the kids here. Parents, what are your interests? Watching cooking programs, I don't know. This is the extent of it. And then you're in that environment where someone's deciding who's the right person to take on the social enterprise role, who's the right person to promote into that new position. Is it the person who's learning Latin in his free time, rowing on weekends, and does fencing classes, or is it you who likes to watch cooking programs in your free time? We have to enculturate our children and give them experiences and understandings about God's earth. So this is an opportunity where we're going to curate a registry of what's available in Slough, around Slough, in the southeast, so that we can't do it for you, but we can showcase for you what you and your children could be doing with your time, instead of just rinsing and repeating the same things in the home every single day. Okay, so moving on. It takes us to the end. We have basically some tidying up exercise here of just looking at what we're trying to offer. We have, number one, a question that may come up around who's teaching? What are we teaching? We've addressed most of the what's. In terms of our main teaching, we have, it was a very tentative exercise where we had really wanted Ustad Ali Ahmed to come on board, but he had other obligations at the time. But we're hoping that we have in fact secured Ali Ahmed to come and do the main, to fulfill the main teaching component within this provision. For me, this is probably the greatest success. Beyond everything else that's been mentioned theoretically, you need to have a teacher who can deliver. After Ali Ahmed have to close his own. But the point is, you need to have a teacher who can effectively form relationships with these children that they need to learn from. A teacher who has had life experience. What are we trying to teach these children? It's not just numbers on a page. We want them to understand what the world is like. We want them to understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. That does not come from going to school, and from school to university, and from university to a PGCE, and from a PGCE to 5 years of teaching, and then lo and behold, I'm a great teacher. It does not happen. And the proof of it is, each of you reflect back. Half of your teachers were alcoholics, half of your teachers were on antidepressants, half of your teachers were just cuckoo. That's the only way that they could sustain a life in education. That is what modern schooling produces. I'll be honest with you. You have to be a rare breed of individual to work in a modern school. It is tough. And you have a few sober figures around that keep the school going together. But you get my point here. This is not what I want my children growing up learning. Someone who's had no real life experience, someone who doesn't know the world, someone who's not been through hardship, someone who does not know how to recover from hardship, someone who does not know about the remembrance of Allah, someone who doesn't have someone doesn't have ease and tranquility in how they can cope with situations. These are the things that I want to see in a teacher. These are the things that I want to see my children learning through osmosis. And then everything else in terms of book knowledge and subject knowledge, as long as a competent job is being done, I'm happy. And I say that as someone very academically minded, very cognitively minded. And still, back when I look at my children and I look at their teachers, this is what I'm looking at first of all. Quran teacher, okay, not quite as strong on the ijazat as this other teacher, but her like general habit with the Quran, love for the Quran, the way that she teaches it is able to inspire and impart an actual identity around that subject. When I see that, I say, this is what I'm going to send my child to go and study Quran. Similarly, with every other subject, I'm looking for these sorts of characters. And so this is what we were really looking for. And it was actually our biggest hurdle. Who are we going to find to teach? And we were talking all about we have to find people and pay them, very well to find the right teachers. But still, then all we can really go on is their expertise, not who they are. And that's not really what we wanted. So, alhamdulillah, with Tawfiq, we have, inshallah, Ustad Ali Ahmed, who's able to step in and do this work. But we also have this wider support. It's not just about one teacher working on their own. It's about the way that we as a community of educators are able to support the way that they deliver effectively. I already mentioned about how we have guest speakers in Oxford coming in. We want to bring all of those sorts of elements into the learning environment here so that we have a wide net of educational professionals able to deliver. We aim to begin in September. We're beginning with a year one provision. Obviously, you guys will know what that means in terms of ages. Location, very important. This for me is not, I don't like this. Like when I teach as well as I teach Arabic and other things as well. And it's always said to me, look, we'll hire our hall. And if ever I can have it in my home or in someone's home, I would always opt for that. Because that is how learning should be happening. It should be happening in environments where people feel natural. Everything has been made synthetic in the modern world. And it's a psychology which has been created. Put on the suit, put on the tie, put on the uniform. You guys may not, have read into these areas. This is purposeful. When you dehumanize someone, you can create them and make them in the image of an economic instrument. This is what you have to do, right? When you go to work, you have to check your emotions, leave your emotions at the door, behave a certain way which is abnormal to your normal way. Think about the language we use, telephone manner. What is all of this? I'm listening to that person that I want to call with that poor customer service man or woman, and I know they have a family at home, and I know they've maybe had a hard day, but none of that's coming through in the conversation. You can just sense it in their tone. But it's called professionalism, right? We don't think about a lot of these dissonances of human behavior that we are part and parcel of, and we're trying to remedy a lot of these things. So we want a homely setting. We want children to understand that they are not going into a machine learning industrial environment where learning happens onto them and they are the subjects of learning. This is not what learning is about. They are participating in a journey as human beings with people that are senior to them and therefore have more wisdom and have more life experience, who are imparting to them something that is valuable and they appreciate that that's what's happening. So that we don't create environments where you sit at school flicking ink at substitute teachers and throwing, bits of glue at people. Do you understand? This is what's happening and your children are all part of it. They are no different to this if that's the environment that you place them in, okay? So we have also, for the same reasons, why we only have such a small presentation, because we're limiting this class. It's going to be 8 at tops, 10 children that we're inviting into this sort of an enterprise. And that's not merely a business strategy, as in year 1, 10, year 2, 25, because people will ask that question. So, this sounds wonderful. So how are you going to expand it? When are we going to? No, we're not trying to expand this. We don't want to see a big school, because what people need to understand is you're arguing for contradictions if you ask for that. You're saying, how do we get to a big school? Well, when we get to a big school, none of what we've spoken about is going to be deliverable anymore. These things are not deliverable on scale. You can't square every circle. You can't take every meaningful idea and scale it up for 1,000 people, 100,000 people. No, there are economies of scale and there are restrictions of scale. As soon as you make something for 100,000 people, you're making it very different to what you're making it for when you're making it for 10 people. And we know this till today. If you are in the 100,000 people camp, you're wearing Armani. If you are in the 10 people camp, you're going to Savile Row and you're getting a bespoke made for yourself and it has no labels on it, but you know your worth. Do you understand? If you are forever those people that want to shop designer, then you're looking for what is the best graded Ofsted school available in the country. For decades now, I've never been in that psychology. We're here to path lead. We're here to pioneer. This is not some content-driven enterprise. Oh, schools, LGBTQ, blah, blah, blah. We won't know. This is not about that. I don't work in that space. This is a space of pioneering and leading in terms of state of the art. Okay? And so class sizes are part of that. Cost is a part of that. We've had to, if it was me, I would say to you, look, where I live and a lot of my friends, even Muslims, we're talking 27,000 a year schooling. Well, I can bring people like not just one, two, half a dozen, if not a dozen friends of mine in Oxford that have their children in anything from Christchurch, which you've seen, the Harry Potter table, that's Christchurch school, all the way through to Abingdon Boys School, the European School, all these schools in Oxfordshire. Standard, 7,000 a term, most of these schools upwards. Okay, 3,000, we said, look, we're in Slough. Okay, 7,000 a term, even for 10 people, we're not going to get there. But why am I bringing this up? Because this is part of an ecosystem that we need to create. And we need to start somewhere. I'm working now at this level, we're working to get people thinking in terms of how we need to finance and be financially involved in creating and enterprising the things that we need to do. But if all of that fails, I'm placing most of my eggs in this next generation. And this is what I want to be what I want to have in a situation where in another generation's time, where we can only provide schooling where it's 2,000 or 3,000 per annum, because that's all that people can afford. Okay, this is a tradition in which it's not monastic Christianity where we kind of live off the wall in every dimension. The heart of our principle of tazkiyah, of self-purification, is to hold in the hand, but not in the heart. And this is a very difficult principle. People speak about it a lot, and it's a great idea for people. But no, I don't have it in my heart, it's just in my hand. But most people, you have it in your heart as well. Your love for dunya is in your heart as well as your hand. But we can educate a generation out of that. We can nurture and give tarbiyah to a generation to hopefully to create better balance in those sorts of things, so that they are able and fully prepared to pursue the sustenance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store for them, but not just so that they can have a nicer existence for themselves, which is where we've ended up. But so that they can take a small portion for themselves and their families, and they can invest the large bulk of that into these lifetime and long-term investments that we need in our community. Where does it begin, though? Something simple and manageable for most of us, £3,000 a year, so that we can provide all the infrastructure that we need for this provision. And lastly, an enrollment date, so that we have the working time that's needed. Because everyone knows, I always have to, the balance between saying things nicely and then putting it on the table. We all want to wait until there's like one day left until you can enroll. And normally wait until the enrollment date's over. And then, by the way, have you got enough people, guys? Is it all looking good? Okay, fine, I'll put my name down for it. So risk assessment all the way to the end, right? Don't want to sign up for anything. No, this isn't going to work if that's the mentality that we're working with here, right? We need to be pioneering in our mindsets. So we can't be saying, right, all the way up until September, either this thing works or it doesn't. And we're going to know whether it works or not by that day, 15th of June, not by people calling 3 days before and saying, is there still a space? Because now I know that you guys are serious, and now that I know you guys have got enough kids, and now that I know that you've got a teacher, and now that I know everything, and I'm finally at peace of mind, now I'm happy to put my kid into this. And then at the first sign of trouble, can I have 2,000 out of my 3,000 back? Because I'm not sure anymore. And my dad said to me, what are you doing? Put your kids back into school. And no, it doesn't work that way. Either this thing works or it doesn't work. And it works because we all come into the project with the right intentions and the right philosophy, or it doesn't work. And then people, at the end of the day, I don't like to put it this way, but I'll go home and I'll still be able to raise my kids in my home and do things, because that's just the gift that Allah has given. I'm a teacher, my wife's a teacher, we've been working in education for 20 years, we have that. But why we're here, it's not for me. My kids are not part of this. I don't even live in Slough. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Because you got to understand. Until you have that selfless and sacrificial psychology that you're building something, nobody benefits. No one gets anywhere. So that's why we're here. And we're done basically with everything that we came to speak about. There's one final slide, because always things will be missed out and people will have questions. So we'll stop here and open the floor. Normally there's, a hand up here that comes up quite naturally in terms of questions. So please feel free to ask and we'll do our best to answer what we can. If it's a lengthy question, if it goes into some deep philosophical question, we may schedule that for a separate conversation, but please feel free to ask questions about the sorts of things that I mentioned. It could be curriculum questions, it could be about delivery, it could be about logistics, it could be about finances, it could be about anything.
I wanted to ask, so September's provision is for year 1. Is that a strict age range for them? Because I'm just thinking, in our case, my eldest son will be going into year 2.
Mm-hmm.
So what we would have covered this year would have essentially been year 1. Right? How does that work?
No, it's going to be. We set year 1 as kind of a target, rough estimate. So year 2, 1 reception, that kind of age range doesn't have to strictly the school
So
years.
just to build on that, because we're raising the standards and we're delivering at year 2, in a sense, even when we're at year 1, in terms of our general ability. What it means that we're able to capture the older students. We're setting the learning at that level, and then differentiation allows the younger learners to be accessing the relevant aspects, right? If you did it the other way, it'd be problematic, right? If you set at year 1 and you've got older students and they're not being challenged, you see the problem, right? So by setting at a higher general standard, because the basic philosophy is about individuating the learning anyway, and outsourcing it back into the home of parents and really bringing those elements back in. So there's a lot of safety net there in terms of the younger learners being able to access what they need and they're being supported in the home. But yeah, more detail Ashraf will be able to fill you in terms of if you have any more specifics about a year 2 entry.
Also, don't make the assumption that, they would have already covered this and then they're going to be going through it again.
Yeah.
So for example, like 33% of the provision Arabic learning would be the same for year 1 reception, 2 4-year-old or 8-year-old, because they're starting Arabic from the beginning. Same will apply for world learning as well. Only place there's going to be a big distinction is the numerical reasoning aspect of it. Even language learning, there's been plenty of studies done, mixed ability classes, the lower end of the student spectrum, they benefit more from having students who are higher ability than setting in general. So if you just follow that principle along to here as well, then the older children will drag up the younger ones to their level.
And that's my experience as well. All subjects aside from maths, normally you don't really see any sort of dissonance between different abilities. Maths is where there'll be most intervention needed, but that intervention rarely isn't about age. It's mathematical ability. So year 2, year 1 isn't the main distinction anyway. When it comes to maths, it's more about just natural easiness with the subject.
And generally speaking, so that year 1, could you have kids that are different ages? A wide spectrum of ages.
We are going to end up having that, yeah.
How, just to
So
clarify,
how
the
it
age,
is not vast like year 1 and year 5. It's going to be within that 5 to 7 age range.
Okay.
Yeah. Couple of years.
Because I'm just thinking this is me being a bit ditzy to it, but when it comes from a teaching element or from a learning element, if you've got a child that's 5 years old and 7 years old, is there a lot of tailoring that needs to be done? If you've got kids,
There's a little tailoring that needs to be done, but don't forget, like, this is completely normal and standard in Montessori schools. It's like it's a standardized model worldwide that you have a differentiated kind of age range and you cater for.
so your essential question is about differentiation. That, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with educational philosophy and stuff. So the question you're actually just asking about, this is for everyone's benefit, is a question about differentiated learning, right? So you have different abilities and different needs that students present with within a classroom. Now, it's very natural to assume that it's correlated with age, or the main correlation is with age. That's just not true in most cases. So there's a bit of reprogramming that needs to happen there, I think. And there's actually there's whole countries that don't educate by age. People are generally aware about, or at least moving in the direction of not educating by age. So it's just a bit of reprogramming on our end, where we're thinking, well, you need to have a year one that has 5-year-olds in there, and year two that has 6-year-olds in there, and year three that has 7-year-olds in there. We push back on that and say that that's just not the case. It's more structuring and standardization of your schooling practice that requires it to be that way. When you got 1,000 kids you have to deal with, you got to create structure that makes it accessible, right?
There shouldn't be a point, no matter how old the child is, that the child isn't challenged in their learning. So if the child is at the upper end of year 2 and he's finding things easy, then the onus is upon the teacher and everybody involved to make sure that child's learning. Whilst if the child's bottom of year 1 and he's more clever than during year 2, it's the same thing. But it's a lot easier to challenge and extend the learning of children when the cohort is as tightly and identify that quickly, rather than in a school setting. So I understand your concern, and the issue is more about challenging and stretching their learning and making sure the truth is we want them to be in line with their peers, as if that's the regards to ability, if it's possible. But it will be should be identified by the teacher and everyone involved.
Keep in mind the child to teacher ratios as well. Like in a conventional school, you'll have about 33 kids, one teacher, and then one assistant teacher. So even if you split them two up, that's 1 to 15. Here we're talking about,
Half that.
yeah.
Well, let's just let everyone have an opportunity to keep.
I was going to raise the question about number of teachers. You mentioned 2 teachers, so in case of absence or anything like that, in case of cover.
Exactly. So we will have a main teacher.
Yeah.
But we're borrowing the same kind of, not just for teaching, but also for safeguarding and other reasons. We're borrowing the same philosophy in terms of having a support teacher as well.
So you have cover basically.
It will address both what you raised, which is, will there be cover available if teachers away? Hopefully we'll minimize that as much as possible. I would say it's never going to be something that you're going to be able to completely eradicate in the way that school allows for such a vast kind of human resource. You'll always be able to cover something, right? And it goes back to the point that was mentioned earlier about this is an involved learning process. So as parents, you're going to have flexibility. It's not going to be called upon every single day or every single week. But if you don't have that flexibility at all, you're like, I just want this smooth system that just doesn't break down or nothing. Then again, that's something you've got to, this isn't necessarily going to fit that. But then the pushback would be, let's address that. Why do you see the world in that way where everything needs to always function without flaw or fault? Life doesn't work that way. Things come up and you've got to be able to manage things sometimes. So bit of both. The main answer to your question is yes, we want to build into the system enough protection so that there's cover and things of that sort. Emergencies as well. A child hurts themselves, you've got a second adult on site who's able to make sure that there's supervision of everyone. So we have thought through all of those sorts of general practice questions that we need to. But yeah, will there be an occasion where even the main teacher and the support teacher come up ill on the same? Yeah, it can happen. And people need to be able to say, okay, fine, kids, you're staying home today. We'll be back in tomorrow. Don't know if that fully answers your question.
No.
Any other questions over here? No?
You thought all the questions were going to come from the ladies.
So how many classes are there going to be in the initial first year? Just the one. So inshallah, if this, is successful and everything in the first year, what will happen the following year?
So it's kind of key stage 1, key stage 2 approach, right?
Mhm.
So let's start with the basic. It could just be a cohort of students.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like I've got 4 children.
Yeah.
Would I love that all 4 of my children, I can get the same experiences for all of them all the way through their young lives? Absolutely. But even in normal settings, that doesn't happen, right? Your kids sometimes will fall in and out of different provisions based on what you're able to secure for them, right? I'm not gonna let the perfect be the enemy of the good and say, because all my 4 children can't have something, none of my children get that thing. That doesn't work either. So it could be, I'm just saying lowest situation, right? Least situation. We create a provision and we don't have any way to grow it even small ways, a second class or a third class. It could just be that we have a cohort of students that we're able to take through a journey of their learning. That's a great thing. That's an immense thing. Don't undervalue that opportunity that you've been able to provide some of your children. But ideally, because we have more than one child and we want to be able to have the same experience for others, we want to at least create like a 2-tier system where you have like a younger cohort going through key stage 1. And by the time they graduate into key stage 2, you have enough provisions for a second key stage 1 to begin. And then it's a bit of a conveyor belt in that sense, as every cohort of students migrate from key stage 1 into key stage 2, that there's provisions available and you're able to push that way. And then we can even start talking about key stage 3 and 4, about secondary school. That's a whole different conversation that we can have another time. So we may very well be looking, if we have that we have essentially a kind of 2-form process that we're working through. It never gets bigger than that, but it's a kind of in parallel key stage 1 and key stage 2, people are migrating out.
Okay. You said there's going to be workshops for parents.
Yes. What would you like to know about these workshops?
I don't know. You didn't say there's no slides on.
Do you want to know a bit more detail?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, it's a whole conversation. It's difficult. I won't go into much of it, but we're not born being good parents. It's flashy, breaking news. We're not born being naturally gifted at marital or parental relationships. These are things that our biology demands, but our experience doesn't quite live up to. So it's a bit of an odd thing that we get to these stages in our lives and we're still just kind of winging it without any exposure to how to improve. And we generally don't do that with anything in life. We don't think that's a rational method for anything, right? That you just kind of are always winging it. So actually at a societal level, this big conversation about how young married families are supported in their relationships between themselves and how they're raising their children. But we can't tackle that huge problem. It's a big thing. At the level of the trust, the seminarium, maybe we can begin doing some things there to help make it a conversation that people value. But definitely for parents or the children that are part of this cohort, it needs to be an important part of the conversation. So we're talking about simple things.
They're not leaving in protest. They just have to be somewhere. Yeah.
We're talking about simple things initially. How to build a structure in your home. Like, I take it for granted, and then people come and talk to me and say, I'm trying to build a structure in my home for my kids. I'm like, oh, wow, like that's a thing. People need help. How to build a structure in the home, what to do in the mornings and evenings and afternoons. Okay, great. Okay, then we come to something more specific as an example. Like, I've got loads of books at home, but my kids don't pick them up, or I'm not seeing necessarily any effect in terms of reading or anything like that. So that's a bit more of an acute problem. We want to be able to help them that. And say, okay, it's not just enough to go to a shop and buy a dozen books and put them in your house, or get a library card and give it to your kid. That's not enough. You need to think about what they are getting exposure to in terms of reading, how they're being supported in reading. Is their underlying communicatory ability strong enough? Because if you can't speak well, your reading is really going to suffer. You're not going to be able to bypass that and go straight to reading. Are you building interest? If children don't have curiosity, they're not going to read. going to be a completely different reason. It's just because they're lacking curiosity. So there's all sorts of things that we can help with on a specific goal. That can also be workshop based. Maths is another area. People are often like, oh, don't talk to me about math. That's where this language comes from. People are, don't talk to me about math. No, we want to talk to you about math. Math should not be that thing that people fear and have a really weird love-hate, pure hate relationship with, right? You've had bad experiences maybe with engaging with maths as a youngster, but maths doesn't have to be all those various formulas and stuff that you have just memorized and then to apply. Definitely not at year 1, year 2, these sorts of levels that we're talking about. It's mathematical reasoning. And it's the sort of reasoning that we should all have some confidence with and be willing to nurture within ourselves, right? So this is what we mean by workshops, being able to target different things and give parents support and tackle questions about how to deliver those things within the home.
So yeah, can I say that there might be specifics, like might be managing behavior, might be a math concept like how to use bar, the bar modeling, how to understand fractions, how to understand decimals, how to teach your children these things. It might be how to get your, as Sheikh said, how to increase the love for reading. So a lot of the things with the support team, of course, they're all teachers, and we get a lot of CPD or professional development at school, which families don't have exposure to. It's providing a place where put you in the best place to support your children through all the years of training and expertise that we've received. So that's basically, yeah, specific examples as well to help me. Not only just parenting and etc., but actually on the ground, how to help your children in terms of subject knowledge or subject gaps that the parents may have, because that's normally an anxiety that parents have. So
We have certain habits in the modern world, and it's just because we're a product of the modern world, we don't realize them. Like, say, for example, you wanted to teach your kids about the stories of the prophets, okay? Let's say this Ramadan, that's going to, like, for a lot of parents, I'd say maybe 90% of parents now, it's here, 1 second, Peter, let me just bring it up, there it is, here you go. And you just put the kid out of the way. Like, is that how we want to bring up these human beings that we've been made responsible for? And we have to answer to God about on the day. Judgment. Is that what we want to do? And sometimes these things are happening intuitively, based on autopilot.
You know, 90% of people have, so we want to be able to have, again, workshops to help them. So people actually knew what the demands were for learning Arabic, how to go about it, how to set effective goals, and not think that you're going to become some grand poet in the Arabic language within 2 years. It would help a lot of people choose the right time in their right time and stage in their life to begin that enterprise, find the right teachers, the right approach, and stuff like this. And what we want here isn't just a bolt-on. If you wanted 1 hour of Arabic club a week and you send your kids to that, you can get that. But ask this as a question. Do you want your child to develop their learning of this language, which is both a modern, an important modern language and a religiously important language, right? The language of the Quran. Do you want your kids to be on this trajectory that by the time they hit 16, 17, and you're able, because you've been saving, you're able to go and do like a 2-month or a 3-month intensive in Jordan or Cairo or Morocco? Your kids have got Arabic at that level. So you're able to go and take them and they can become near native or fluent in classical Arabic through a really intensive stage, like I said, in Cairo or Yemen or somewhere. We will have to, but you can't just rock up there with like Ba'ala and think that, okay, now I'm going to do a 6-week intensive in an Arab country. You're going to spend 6 weeks learning what you could have learned 7 years ago, sitting here with a basic book. But we're repeating a lot of these errors. So again, the workshops highlight for us, my point here is they're highlighting for us ways that we have complete misunderstandings about how goals are achieved. It'll benefit us, benefit our children, but not just in the short term. Because if I want my child when they're 15, 16 to be in that situation, I need to start working now. I need to get through all of these other goals now so that I've got this confident 15, 16-year-old that has all of what they could possibly learn in this country in the Arabic language, ready to go and master it in a conversationally fluent way in a native environment, rather than going there and learning things, figuring out there that you should have come having already learned X, Y, and Z, right? So there's a lot of ways, that's the main thing. There's so much support that can be built into workshops and seminars and things like that. We don't necessarily value. Any other questions? Keep moving around.
So you were saying something about removing old language, like the way that we see language, and about having a deep love and understanding of faith. But how do we as parents, if you're removing the old language, how do we as parents assess the milestones that our children are actually achieving? If they're not coming home and learning the surahs and learning all these things, how are we actually assessing what progress they're making?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And it's a learning journey. It's not going to happen by replacing an old set of terms and categories with a new set of terms and categories, which is often what we think about when we say that something's become obsolete and now we're upgrading. You think, okay, fine, that's a model with a certain barcode and label and category scheme, and now we're just replacing it with a new version. And there are no new versions. We're addressing a fundamental problem. The problem can be exposed in different ways, but I'll give you one way because it's very real and recent. I'm just finished teaching a module on Islamic history. Okay. The people who attended that, maybe one of them had read a book on Islamic history before. My experience when I go and speak to Muslims, do you know anything about Islamic history? The answer is no. So we're addressing real problems like that. If you address real problems and you nurture a culture of genuine learning, and at those levels, those deep metaphysical levels that we're talking about, then you have the yardsticks to assess what your children are doing. Let's put it in simple terms. If I don't know anything about cars, what do I have to go on when I need to take my car now to get something fixed? I have no intuitive knowledge. I don't know. All I can do is use external metrics, labels, titles. I can just go online and say reviews, car garages, and see how many stars they have next to them. And if I feel like I can go into Google comments and reviews and see if people have said good things or bad things. I have no internal knowledge about that discipline whatsoever. And I'm just relying, and if I rely on those external markers, I might get it right sometimes, I might get it wrong. It's still a very risky enterprise. And that's what we're all in, using that analogy when it comes to Islam as well. I have no internal metrics to know whether my kids are doing well. I've memorized 3 surahs myself that I repeat in every prayer. And I want to know how my kids are improving. All I can do is see how many new surahs that they've picked up with their teacher. But we've seen the outcome of this. Kids, I've done 3 khatams. Okay, great. I've memorized these surahs, read some Quran, and then you're like excruciatingly listening to someone reading Quran. And they've been going for 10 years to Qarisa, for 10 years. And this is what's been produced at the end of it. It's a real sad situation. If those parents had a relationship themselves with Quran, if they knew something of the Quran, they would know within year 1, Qarisa, it's not working with Qarisa. We should find some other solution, because how are they going to know that? And this is the same problem we have in tutoring. So many examples I can bring. Kids that are doing years of tutoring still coming out with grade 4s and 5s in their maths because they have no internal knowledge of someone with all these accolades. Little do they know they're going into a classroom of 30 students, the teacher's not even teaching, he's got all his subordinates doing worksheets with them, and it's just the money generating tutoring enterprise. Nobody knows how to sift between the good and the bad. Back to my analogy, if I know about cars, I'm going to know more about who I'm calling upon to work on my car and fix it and things like that. So what I'm saying here is that, again, through these workshops and other avenues, we need to tackle this question head on about our relationship to our own faith. If we are here sitting 1400 years on from the time of prophethood, and we have no idea how Islam reached us here, we're sitting here in Islam, 1,400 years have gone, and you just ask a simple question. Here was a prophet that came, and here are you. Like, tell me something about what's happened there. Because how else are you doing? I don't want to create intellectual crises for people. Why else are you putting stock in what you put stock in? You don't look at some Sikh guy and say like, oh, that's amazing. He's got this whole tradition which is built upon falsity. And part of your exposure of that is saying, look, you don't know anything about this thing that you're worshipping, and you're trying to get them to realize your own falsehood. But we as Muslims are sitting here suffering in many ways from the same sort of problem. If someone asks you why are you Muslim? Why is it true? Why should I accept it from you? Hold that thought. I'll be back. Rush to the masjid. Speak to the imam. Come back. That's our situation. Do we want to, is that what we're trying to essentially replicate in our children? They grow up through only having a cultural identity or attachment to Islam. So it's not a straightforward answer to your question. If we get rid of, no, we don't get rid of them. We can keep those markers. Definitely not get rid of anything. This is good business practice. If you haven't got a replacement for it, you keep things going, however bad they are. So we'll keep all these things. My point here isn't to say throw out all the metrics that you have, but it's a journey to improve that. We need to get on that journey ourselves. Initially, we're not going to be able to help our kids completely. That's why we're creating all of this. So you have an avenue that your kids are going to get a different exposure to their faith, an improved, vibrant exposure to what Islam is. But it's all just to buy you time. If you think this is going to mean that you don't have to do anything, and again, just you're leaving your kids at the front door, that's not what this is about. It's to buy you time and say, look, in that time, let's open up this conversation about what we know about our own deen, what we know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what journey we need to go on, as I mentioned. So we're not sitting there having to go to YouTube to find out about lives of the prophets. We can talk to our children about the lives of our prophets and history of Islam and things of that sort.
Can I just interject? Sorry. Just for your information, so in maths there will be like formative assessments and some form of summative assessment, so you can check that they're age appropriate. In the writing, so I do a lot of writing moderation, so all the way for the primary, I can see that, if it's appropriate and they're not lagging behind. Islamically, we kind of have our own objectives, but through the Quran and Arabic and some sort of memorization, we're hoping for that, at least at the end of the primary, that the children have memorized 6 to 7 juz. So we have our own kind of milestones, so for us to know. And obviously it's our job to make sure that happens. So in case you want some concrete, how is the assessment looking at maths, how is it looking at writing, looking at reading? I do moderation, we do the assessments, and Islamically, we're kind of using memorization, but we're hoping to leave them in really good stead. Ashfaq guarantees us that 7 juz is easy. I don't know. So but 6 to 7 juz at the end of the primary school, so these are just some concrete assessment milestones for you if you need them.
Yeah, sure. Good.
Just a second question online. In your timetable section, after family lunch, things like chess, cards, and horse riding and swimming, supposed to be setting up themselves, or is that something the school is going to help?
Yeah, so help is the right word. We could have left it blank, but we wanted to inspire, because fine, you got all this free time, and then people realize they don't know what to do with the free time, right? So it was to inspire, to say that you don't have to just repeat the same things. You don't have to just send your kids to a football club. Great, if you like football, why not? But there's so many other things that you can do with them. But yes, we're not providing these things. I mentioned earlier that we want to create a registry or a catalog of what's available, whether that takes a physical form. That might be good for the wider community as well, to be able to, for people to know where to access. Informing parents and saying, look, this is what's available on Mondays and Tuesdays, all through the week at different times. These are the costs. Here's the contact numbers, and just go and do your research and see if you want to put your kids in. And you might do it as an individual exercise, or you might group together a few kids. But it's not as a whole cohort that every single student needs to go and do those things. It's about what your children want to access. Like my oldest one loves football, so she goes and does football. The younger one prefers art. We had her in with an art teacher doing some artwork and stuff. So it's about people, dipping in and out of what they enjoy.
And also, if it's going to be finished at 12 and then from 12 to 3, the child is just placed in front of the TV, then that's really counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here. Because that's actually more damaging. You're better off just having them in school if that's the case. So it is about having honest conversations with yourself that, well, in that time that we've reclaimed with our children, are we actually going to do something, for the benefit of
It gets easier as they get older, because one of the things you try to teach your children when they're about 7, 8 at least, is about self-regulation. Again, something schools do have the opposite effect on. So self-regulation is where you're learning how to regulate your own behaviors and set your own times for things. And you can see this now, people are looking at adults skirmishly around the room because I don't have any self-regulation for my own time. But and we saw in lockdown, a lot of people suffered having to work from home because they couldn't manage things as well. And so it's actually a real opportunity as well that your children are home, you're teaching them from a young age that they have different things to do at different times, and then you're not necessarily forcing them all the way through, but you're checking with them to see whether they have done different things, incentivizing it. And so
He's still with the project. He's not abandoning us. It's just a prior engagement.
So I have 3 questions and I have to leave in a minute.
somebody else has done.
Not abandoning. So your environment at Oxford and also this one, does it